Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. It's the show that helps you clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life. I'm your host, Park Howell. Now, you want pricing to communicate the true value of what you offer and fuel the growth of your business. If you can find the right story behind your price, then your customers will gladly pay for the outcomes you deliver. But it's easy to feel totally overwhelmed and even a little paralyzed because pricing feels like a black box. Confusing metrics, vague value, and no clear process to guide you. That's why today's episode is such a game changer. Dan Balcauski, founder of and chief pricing officer at Product Tranquility, is a pricing expert who helps high-volume B2B SaaS companies define pricing and packaging strategies that drive growth. He shares how pricing is not just a number, it's your brand narrative in action. So, if you want to price with purpose and confidence, this one's for you. Can you believe it? It's been almost 2 years in the making, but today, Monday, July 7th, 2025, we are launching our Story Cycle Genie, the only brand strategy and content creation platform built on the proven Story Cycle system, which has grown brands by as much as 600%. Think of the Genie as your brilliant branding content agency in a bottle that enables you to craft a lucrative brand narrative foundation, develop a compelling content marketing strategy, and create amazing stories based on your unique, authoritative brand story, and you can do it all in minutes, not months. Now, most people feel overwhelmed when developing their brand. We will make you overjoyed by the simple process and the amazing outcomes you achieve quickly. Here's what some of our early users are saying about their enthralling experience with the Story Cycle Genie.
There are aspects of what was revealed from that process that I thought was really good. And bear in mind, I'm often asked to simplify things and boil things down to their very essence. And the most meaningful thing I got from that exercise is the word at the end of this when you suggested, well, what you really could position yourself is a sage. But when I saw sage, I was thinking, okay, that might not be the kind of thing I say about myself, but I thought the insight was just fabulous. What a great word. I felt what that process did is it took apart something very complex and gave me a lot more ways to think about it.
Park, I did tell you when we met last week, I had a lot of emotions about this. The first was just, wow. There's some amazement and some pride because what the Genie picked up on were things that were very important to me that I knew about myself and that I knew that I wanted to convey. And in addition, brought this incredible insight to me, very specific words that I really wasn't emphasizing. I mean, probably the biggest one of all is that I'm a consultant. I do all kinds of leadership development, but I was not thinking about Rails and the Rails Talk methodology being at the core of everything I do. How did I miss that? The Genie pulled that up. And when I first read it, I thought, how come I wasn't thinking like that?
That was amazing. And I really loved that you came on the show and walked me through that because that was, well, first of all, easier for me to process than reading 7 pages. But it was also very enlightening, right? Because you were talking me through each step, the output that we got from your system, what that meant, and how to apply it. The one thing I kept thinking and saying repeatedly was, wow, that is spot on. It was really, really good.
You can start using the Story Cycle Genie today. Just visit storycyclegenie.com That's storycyclegenie.ai. And start crafting that lucrative brand story, that amazing content, social media, marketing strategy, and all of the incredible stories you need to connect with and convert your prospects to lifelong customers. And you can do it all in minutes, not months. I promise you, we will take the overwhelm out of crafting your brand story and make you overjoyed with the findings. Just check it out at storycyclegenie.ai. I fed Dan Balcauski's product Tranquility brand into the Genie and then sent him the findings before today's conversation. You will hear later in the show his take on the output. And it's really important because this guy knows what he's talking about. He's got more than 20 years experience in the tech industry, including engineering, product management, and executive leadership positions. He's guided fast-growing startups and established enterprises, bringing a rare blend of analytic rigor and customer-centric thinking to the complex world of SaaS pricing. Dan also hosts SaaS Scaling Secrets podcast, where he interviews B2B sales leaders about what it really takes to scale successfully. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Dan Balcauski. Dan, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Park. I'm excited for a conversation. Thank you for having me.
And you mentioned you are coming to us from Austin, Texas. I was just there last week working with the single largest retired teachers association in America. And great fun. And their whole, the TRTA, their whole mission is to help save the retirement packages for these wonderful teachers that dedicate their lives to kids. And I just want to give them a shout out and to your beautiful city.
Well, I appreciate that. And my mom being a retired teacher, I appreciate that you're helping those folks out.
Yeah, well, if she's in Texas, have her look into TRTA. It's a heck of a great program. But I'm glad to have you here. Pricing. Now, I had mentioned to you earlier, you are my 523rd episode over 9 years with the Business of Story, and we've never talked about the story around pricing, specifically SaaS pricing. And really, when you think about it, pricing is nothing but a story. A story first, founders, CEOs, CMOs tell themselves about what their product's worth, and then how they communicate that story to get buyers to believe in that pricing. Because when it comes down to it, correct me if I'm wrong, pricing is really subjective, is it not?
That is correct. And I feel all the pressure to do right by my other pricing brethren, having the honor of being your first pricing person on the show. But yes, pricing is an interesting amalgam that blends, there definitely is a science, there's analytics, but it also blends psychology, because value and price are incredibly linked, and value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. And so we can't, with any 10 decimals of precision, talk about how happy someone is. And if we think about pricing, it's a measure of desire, motivation, how much you want something. So it's a nice world where we get to bring both the science and analytics together with psychology. It's a fun area.
Well, we're going to get to that in just a second, but after reading your background and your history, I would love for you to share your somewhat circuitous route to becoming a SaaS pricing guru you are today. And to me, all of those starts and stops really inform your brilliance in what you do today.
Yeah, it's definitely been a circuitous route. I have been enmeshed in the tech space, software world, my entire couple decade career at this point. I started off more as a builder on the engineering side, and then moved into engineering management. The company I was at was a bit unique. It was one of these companies that sort of sold products to engineers by engineers, and so did not really have a product management function. So as an engineering leader, I was also responsible for helping define the product roadmap. And there was a instance, it seems, these things are kind of trivial until you sort of, realize how they shift your thinking. I remember there was one of those product marketing folks came down and was like, well, why wouldn't customers just build what we're building themselves. And you're like, okay, well, that seems like a dumb question on the surface. Like, we got teams of engineers who are just building this, but customers don't necessarily realize that. They may not understand, what it's worth. And then, you start to think about things like comparative advantage and how, it's much better to pay someone who's a specialist, or a company that's focused on just solving that problem, that's already thought through all the corner cases, et cetera, right? Just turnkey. And that's really got my wheels turning. And, in that role, kind of blended engineering leader slash product leader, really started to ask myself the question, like, well, why is it that the bits that we're shipping are valuable to people? And customers got money in their pocket. Why do they spend it with us versus somebody else? And ultimately, how does that turn into a viable business for us as a company? And so it was really these kind of deeper questions that really got my wheels turning. Ultimately, decided to, based upon that line of thinking, decide to pursue an MBA. And, I was very lucky when I was doing my full-time MBA. I had an internship with a very successful Silicon Valley startup. And one of the kind of core projects that was given to me that summer, among several other things I worked on, was a decision on the CEO's desk. I won't go into all the details, but ultimately they were trying to determine if they should go with like a freemium type business model. And so at the time, this is about 2010, 2011, it was peak hype, of freemium. There was a couple of companies, Evernote of one, but if you looked at any week looking at TechCrunch, there was somebody talking about how many users they had gotten through this freemium approach, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really got to dive down into where this model works, where it doesn't work, and really start to separate the hype from the reality, and kind of crystallize that that very popular model only works under very specific, surprisingly rare circumstances, which is kind of dig below the headlines. And post MBA, I became kind of official product leader at multiple products and companies, where again focused really on how do we kind of understanding the overall company strategy, the needs of our customers, our need to make money. How do we focus that kind of tip of the spear on where we invest? What's going to actually solve customer problems, going to have the largest impact? One of the problems you're always dealing with as a product leader is you've got 100x more inbound requests than you could possibly build, several lifetimes. Maybe that curve might be bending with the world of AI and vibe coding. We don't know. But
so the old scope creep, when you think that you need to add 100 more features to it, and actually 2 will probably suffice and make you the most money.
Exactly. And while I was in those roles, I would get pulled into pricing conversations for the products that I was building. The companies I was at, the product managers did not own pricing, which I don't have a philosophical difference at. We could talk about who should own it if that's of interest. But product marketing folks would technically had ownership, and they would be like, hey, like I'm really good at doing messaging and content and positioning work. I don't know anything about this pricing stuff. You got an MBA. Can you come help us? And so I, made my mistakes trying to apply some academic frameworks that don't work in certain situations, but they don't tell you that, on the box before you try to go down that route, and got my fair share of bumps and bruises. And then about, was it 2018, decided to go take a little bit of a career sabbatical, travel around the world for a year and a half. And always thought I would start my own company, and decided to, well, let me go try this consulting thing and focus on, I've been focused on pricing and packaging. We may talk about how I landed on that a little bit more, but, been focused on that exclusively for the last 5 years, because ultimately I found that, a lot of companies struggle with how to do this properly and turn it from a confusing liability into a strategic advantage.
Yeah, and you had seen out there the trend for fractional CMOs, and you thought, well, I've not seen any CPOs, chief pricing officers, so you thought there's got to be, as you said in your what you sent over to me, this has got to be the greatest opportunity, or there's a big reason why nobody's doing this. But you jumped in with both feet.
Yeah, correct. Well, that was definitely, there's people make fun of it in an interview process. It's like, tell me about a time you failed, or like, what's a weakness, right? And I think a lot of folks kind of clam up during those conversations, right? Because they don't think about, failures. But when you're trying to start or run a business, I feel like I could, depending on the week you ask me, I could give you 10 examples of what went wrong that week. And you just pointed at one of them. And, that was kind of the initial thesis. I saw, hey, there's these, fractional chief legal counsel, chief financial officer, CMO, but no one's really doing this for the product world. And yeah, either this is a brilliant opportunity or about to discover why no one else is doing this. And so I was absolutely confident and, built a whole, strategy around it. Had a bunch of different areas I could help with, and was going out to revolutionize how folks think about their product strategy. And reality kind of punched me in the face.
Well, and then you said where you really got your traction with Product Tranquility is that you had a whole list of bullet points of different things you could do for people, and you kept getting pinged on one of those points, and you decided that, maybe I shouldn't try to build the market that I think should be there, but actually respond to the market that's actually there because customers are asking for this.
Yeah, correct. And, there's many reasons why I think a fractional chief product officer doesn't exist. A couple just high level points are, product management as a function is really hard to drive a measurable outcome. So if you contrast that with, you go hire a marketing agency to go run your Google AdWords, right? It's very much like, hey, you give us $10,000 of ad spend, we turn that into, X number of leads, which convert to revenue. It's a very clean story. Product management does not necessarily have that clear story. Anyone who's managed a product team and has tried to hold them to outcomes, well, I can't really measure them by revenue because they're not like sales reps. They don't have a quota. They didn't do the marketing. They didn't generate the leads. They didn't write the code. So how do you measure that? So that turns out to be a very difficult. And I went through a couple different pivots. At first, then I was like, okay, well, kind of recognizing that, let me look at maybe something like retention, which in the subscription world, very important, very measurable impact. Quickly learn the people who own those retention problems, whether that's chief customer officer or head of customer success, tend to not want to solve those problems the way a product person would. They tend to want to build teams and figure out how they can give customers more hugs per hour as a way to solve customer retention issues. I also looked at something like product-led growth. But what I discovered there is that depending upon who you talk to, everybody seems to have a different definition of what that means, which is not a real strong foundation to build a business on. And, and like you pointed out, I was getting some inbound, demand on the side just of, hey, can you come help us with pricing? And decided to kind of follow that lead and see where that went. And I realized that this was a thing. And, much like, I mentioned the kind of marketing agency, it's a very clear line, right? There's only really three ways to grow a B2B software company. You could acquire more customers, you could monetize them better, you could retain them longer. And I found most companies tend to ignore their monetization approach. And that's a major growth driver. So it was a much easier story to tell. I can't say it's easy, but it was more straightforward.
Yeah, but I think all your starts and stops and your successes and your failures lead to now what you are doing at Product Tranquility, and a very interesting brand, which of course we ran through our brand Story Cycle Genie, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I want to jump into now some of the biggest problems, because we are right in the throes of trying to figure out how to price our Story Cycle Genie. It literally launched yesterday to our beta group, and we'll do a soft launch in early July, and then the big launch after Labor Day. But some of the things that you talk about is the who matters more than the what in your pricing. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so most folks, when they think about pricing, really just focus on the number. Is this $99? Is this $199? But really where we spend the majority of our time when working with clients is trying to understand the different elements of what I call packaging. So when I talk about pricing, I'm always talking about pricing and packaging. And in the SaaS world, that really breaks down into 4 specific elements. So your price metric, your price model, your offer configurations, and your price fences. I'm happy to elaborate in detail on those. But the ultimately, like when we think about something like a price metric, so that's a unit I charge for that helps, if there are certain customers that get more value or that cost more to serve, those are accounted for in how that price metric scales. For example, if I charge you but per seat or per API call or per gigabyte of data, we've all experienced these different products that have these different metrics, right? Focusing on getting that question right can be much more impactful than your concerns about the number. And obviously, you have to put a number on it at the very end of the process, but that's really where we want to focus the majority of our efforts.
But what do you do then? What are the questions you ask yourself to get that metrics right?
Yeah. So in terms of something like a pricing metric, so just to give folks a sense of what we're talking about, like I will often use if I go to McDonald's and I buy a hamburger, I pay whatever $3 for that hamburger. If I buy 2 hamburgers, it's 2 times $3. 10 hamburgers, 10 times $3, right? So that scales because I'm buying more, and so I'm getting more. Ostensibly, I'm getting more value. Now, you could argue that if I'm the one eating all those hamburgers, probably I'm getting marginally less value out of each hamburger I eat. I'm really hungry when I eat the first one. The second one, maybe I should stop there. But anyone who's ever gone to a bar, the 6th cocktail, you might end up having negative value as you proceed. And so, really, then what we're trying to understand is, at the beginning of any of this work with clients, what we're really trying to understand is who are our customers, and what are those specific customer segments? Because those different customer segments will have different ways of thinking about the value that we provide. And this is where the rubber hits the road. What do I mean by that? So if I offer you, let's take the commodity of all commodities, water. If I'm on a road trip, I stop off at a gas station to top up, I go in, buy a bottle of water, I might pay $2. If you've been wandering through the Sahara for a week, you'd probably have a much higher willingness to pay for that water. If your pipe in your basement breaks, that water has negative value to you, and you probably pay a significant amount of money to a plumber to come and get rid of all of it for you. So depending upon the context those customers are in, they're going to perceive the value that we provide differently. And therefore, there may be different price metrics that matter or are more suitable for certain customers in certain contexts than in others. And so we really want to understand that up front, because that's going to provide a structured lens that we can look at our trade-offs. Because what will often end up in these type of scenarios is there's rarely a situation where there's just one obvious choice. Let's be honest. If there was one obvious choice, we probably wouldn't be having that conversation with the client. But this is why these distinctions are critical. The other things that we would want to be looking at besides how things scale with value are, do they also correlate with our costs? Because we want to make sure that we're at least not upside down on margin with customers. If you're selling $20 bills for $10, you're not going to be in business very long. And so we want to make sure that we're protected and able to make that a viable business opportunity. And then also we want to make sure that we're looking at something that both sides feel they can exert some sort of operational control over. If I am getting my utility bill from here in Austin during the summer, I understand that if I put my thermostat at 80, the bill I'm going to get at the end of the month from Austin Energy is going to be much less than if I put it at 70. And so, you want to be able to, both sides need to be able to feel like they could exert some kind of control over it. So those are some of the high level things that we'd be looking at in those discussions.
Mm-hmm. Can we use the story cycle genie as an example here? Because
Sure.
We're going through this thinking right now, so I'll bounce it off of you. So we have 3 customer segments.
Okay.
And you could put them all under the umbrella of those that own the brand story to both create and communicate. So that's kind of, who we're speaking with. Audience number one are small to mid-sized businesses. And these are folks that have, great business models and they're making money, but they are absolutely stymied because they do not have a clear and concise, compelling brand story strategy, and content in place, primarily because they don't have the time to ultimately focus on it, nor do they have the money to be able to go and spend big time on a branding agency and so forth to make that happen. Mm-hmm. So it's somewhat of the democratization of branding for these types of companies, because with the Story Cycle Genie, they can now create literally their brand story in minutes and not months at a fraction of the cost. And of course, I sent yours over. We'll talk about yours a little bit later, but that's audience number one. Audience number two is the enterprise CMO and sales enablement person, because they've got this large group. They're trying to get sales and marketing to talk together with one another. They're trying to tear down those silos and have a consistent and compelling story that can be told, right every time. So they can bring that in. It's an enterprise platform rich Story Cycle Genie that you can lock down the brand story, and then sales and marketing and HR and leaders can have access to it, but they can't mess with it. And then the third one are agencies and marketing consultants. Agencies, of course, are trying to figure out ways to still be valuable to their customers out there, to accelerate the branding process, to be able to reduce the cost to their clients while actually increasing the margins in that product. So for sales, ad agencies and marketing folks. So those are our three primary segments that we're looking at.
Okay, got it. And so do you have a specific question you want to start, or you just want me to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, then real quick, then we're looking at, of course, one overall pricing model. Because we work on a platform we've built called Brightsea. We use APIs that pull in a number of different AI agents out there to be able to create all of this. And so we've got three pricing models. The startup package, we're considering right now at $199 a month, which buys you 200 credits. And I know that people don't really know what that means, but I can show them for $199, you are going to get all of this output. You're probably going to get about $50,000 worth of value for $199 a month. Now, if you run out of the credits, the 200 credits, then you can buy additional credits in any month. So it's a hybrid, and I'm kind of curious of what you think of the hybrid pricing. You've got a subscription basis, and then if you run out, you can buy some more, at whatever volume you want. Then we've got a growth package at $499 a month that buys you 600 credits. And then we've got an enterprise package at roughly $1,200 a month. And of course, then we've got, if you sign up for an annual subscription, there's 20% off the overall packages. Bottom line is we are delivering an immense amount of value, but we're also playing in the quote unquote AI world, where there are a lot of people out there that are charging very little for access to some of their agents.
Okay, got it. So let's start with this, because there's a lot of different levers, and I want to make sure that it's valuable for you and we also don't lose the audience.
Right.
So let's just focus for the time being on the two different segments, the SMB versus the enterprise CMO, right? And then there was also agencies and stuff. We'll just to leave those aside.
Yep.
What I heard you describe is something I would call, I think, volume-based tiering. What I would call is volume-based tiering, but I want to just make sure for that SMB versus enterprise customer, is the distinction in what they're buying only the number of credits that they come with in a base? Okay.
Yes, exactly right. They get access to everything inside the Genie. It's just how much credits that they need to make that work for them.
Okay. So not my favorite way to do it, but it's not uncommon.
And what don't you like about it?
So, well, a couple of things. The first I would double click on is credits the right metric. So you hinted at it before, right? People don't necessarily understand what a credit is. We're seeing this a lot in the AI world, where people are not only the sort of the foundation model providers, your OpenAIs, Anthropics, Google, Gemini, et cetera, but also the people who are embedding those in applications are now having to deal with a significant sort of variable cost. And so maybe you had a per seat model and you had some AI capabilities. The CFO has a panic attack, says, "Oh my God, I see this giant bill going out the door every month to OpenAI," or pick one of your others. How do we make sure that we don't end up upside down, like I said before? And so folks will layer in some sort of, and then this gets you X amount of tokens or credits as well. The problem is, to a certain extent, right, then the customer, what you've done in that situation is now we've flipped it from talking about the customer, their problem, the value, into an implementation detail of how we're creating that value. And so my initial reticence is that we should almost always try to find something that amplifies the value of the story we're trying to tell, that is something that the customer already cares about, perhaps something that they already measure, right? If I'm selling a CRM, if it's per seat, because every seat of the salesperson who uses it is going to get additional value, it's very easy for me to talking to the CRO or the VP of sales. How many salespeople do you have? If instead I say, hey, like, how many credits are you going to use per month on our CRM, or how many gigabytes of data or of files is your sales team going to sell? Very likely they're not tracking that currently. And so it's going to add friction to that process. And so for you may try to understand or work backwards from what is the value we provide, and then what are the things that are correlated with that value, starting there versus your cost model. Because that's cost-based pricing. There are many debates out there, not the worst thing in the world, but ultimately, right, we want to usually start with what customers value, try to work backwards. So is this, hey, the number of products that they're running through it? Is it the number in marketing? It's rarely the number of seats scales with value, but MarTech tends to be like the number of accounts they have in their database, but that doesn't really apply here. We try to align with, okay, what is that scale where those, like, what is the difference between those enterprise customers? What might they do with the product that we could measure or monitor that is closer to the value that you're ultimately trying to tell or trying to provide. The other dimension, which I was hinting at before, is it sounded like the only difference between what the SMB customer was buying and the enterprise customer was buying was that starting number of credits. This is where it gets into what is the right offer configurations or bundles. As we think about what are the jobs, what are the capabilities that enterprise customer might need or want that the smaller customer doesn't need or want. Common things when we think about enterprise: security features, single sign-on, for example, SOC 2 compliance, different data ownership rights, dedicated customer success managers, additional training, onboarding capabilities. As we're painting that picture, we want to expand from not only what is the features, but are there other services that are enveloped in that offer that group customer cares about, such that, let's just say, for example, both groups started at 200 credits. For the sake of argument, we'll leave it as credits. But the SMB package, it's, 10 cents a credit. The enterprise package, it's $1 a credit, right? So because they're getting those additional capabilities, and we see this often, you go to any SaaS pricing page, you'll often see good, better, best, right? This is, it's like, hey, we have a consistent scaling metric, say it's seats, but the good package is $9 a seat. The better package is, $19 a seat, and the best is $49 a seat, whatever it might be. So those are the two dimensions I might kind of push your thinking on off the bat. And obviously there's a bunch in that.
No, this is great. Yeah. And when we're thinking of SMBs, I hear you loud and clear, and Sean and Matt, my co-creators of the Genie, have had a long conversation about it. With the SMB, this group that I found in our research that only 1% of North American companies do more than $10 million a year annually in sales. That blew me away. And then I've seen some other numbers that it may be like 4 to 5%, but either way, there's very few. There's a gigantic, opportunity out there for SMBs to grow if they could get their story straight. And you've heard it, I'm sure, throughout your whole product development life. The old dilemma of you can have it good, fast, or cheap. Pick two, right? We call that actually a trilemma. You can have a good, fast, and cheap. Well, with the Genie, and for all of the users, but especially SMB, you can now have all of that. You can have brilliant branding in minutes, not months, based off how you're already showing up in the world, and then how you can go ahead and tweak that brand foundation and then instantly create any content that comes out of that based on your unique and authoritative, differentiated brand story. And you can get it literally at pennies on the dollar. So, for instance, the first brand narrative strategy that I sent you, all I did was fed it your website at producttranquility.com and your personal profile from LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Genie, tell me about Dan and Product Tranquility. And within 5 minutes, I had all of that intel in that report. Now, I've run the story cycle system and clients through it for the past 20 years. Some have grown as much as 600%. It's typically a 3 to 4 month process. And all that discovery, research, and positioning literally was done in about 5 minutes. Now, not saying that it was perfect. It's just how you're currently showing up in the world. But then you, as the brand owner, go in and do all the tweaking, whatever, and then can create any kind of content off of it. So we have taken that trilemma, and that is our story. You can now have brilliant branding in minutes, not months, at a fraction of the cost. That would have probably cost $50,000 for a branding agency to do what I did in 5 minutes and sent you.
That totally makes sense, and I have no doubt about the value. I think there's a couple when it goes back to kind of the scaling metric or the pricing metric, the credits that we mentioned. I think especially if you're targeting very small business SMB companies, especially B2B companies who are selling enterprise with a sales team, can absorb a lot of sins of their go-to-market model that includes pricing and packaging, because they have this understanding that we'll always have a Sherpa, the salesperson, who's there explaining things, guiding them along. I tend to focus on companies that are a little bit more like who you're selling to, which is, maybe, anywhere from prosumer to what I might call high volume. So say ACVs, less than 6 figures, probably less than 50K. And in there, you have a go-to-market model that requires, to be a viable business, that only a fraction and probably less than a majority of your deals actually talk to sales, because sales conversations are expensive. If I need to have sales walk customers through to go through a whole process, then that potentially blows up my entire model. And so when we're thinking about something like a credit model, one of the concerns that's especially relevant when you're selling a high volume, low touch transaction is that anything that becomes confusing adds friction to that go-to-market process. Anything that requires an explanation. Like, I'm sure you're very convincing if you got on the phone with any of these customers, you could explain to them why credits make sense, et cetera, et cetera. But we want to make sure that whatever we choose makes sense. So someone can visit our pricing page, say, yeah, that sounds good, and click buy now, right? And requires no additional sort of thinking, because we all know kind of confused customers don't buy, I think is the phrase a lot of sales folks will use. And I buy into that. So I think that's a danger, especially if you have a high volume, low touch transaction type go-to-market model that you really want to be cautious about. There are models out there, and again, only knowing what we've talked about in terms of the offer that you're having, but some things that may be closer to the value that you're offering to create is, how many products are they trying to do this for? How many assets are they trying to create? I use transcription software for running my podcast as well as for meetings. And how many minutes of audio or video am I having it process, right? As a podcast producer, I know that I've got, an hour conversation, 2 separate audio tracks, that's 2 hours of transcription time. I don't necessarily, if they took that and translated that into machine credits, all of a sudden I would have to go do some complicated spreadsheet math, but I know how many minutes that are there. So that's the challenge that I would put forward to you on that.
Yeah. And the different packages are really, you're exactly right, volume based. And when we talk about credits, it's really more for ourselves to really understand how best to create those tiered programs. So say if you are an SMB and it's just you using it, you will get a ton of value at that first tier at $199 a month. If now say you're an ad agency and you've got several people, account and creative people, strategists on there, then the growth plan is going to save you 20% on the credits, because that's what we are dealing in. Our value is what you actually get. But the AI world we're dealing is token/credit, and I know that that's confusing to a lot of people. It comes down to, okay, I can promise you if you spend this amount of money, forget the available credits, you will be able to create these 5 pieces of your story, strategy, if you will. And if you did this the old way, it would cost you months of your time and your people's time, and it would cost you tens of thousands of dollars with a consultant to do it. Now you can, of course, do it in minutes, not months, at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah. So one area, and I would challenge you to think about this is, so first of all, I'm a big fan of iteration. I think that there's one overall mistake that people make is they think about pricing as an event, not a process. It is something that you can revisit, especially as you're launching things new. I talk to a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. I tend to work with companies that are a little bit more established, about 20 million in revenue on up. But I have a lot of conversations with folks who have the exact same sort of concerns of like, I've got this cost, I don't know what to do. It's like, hey, put something out there, sell, get people using it. If you find out that it doesn't work, you can change it. And that, you don't want to throw your, especially if you've got a significant customer base, you don't want to put them through pricing transformation every year. But it is possible to, update and iterate. Right. And so one of the things that I would probably try to look out for if I were you is to get one of these SMB customers the result that they need. Say you get your first 10, 20 customers, and then you go look at what is the distribution on the back end of what they actually used to get the result we promised them. My sense is you could probably look at that distribution and say, look, we can not even mention credits, just if we charge them an equivalent of what 95% of the cases would equal to, so that they never have to think about that. And there's going to be some that are really intense users. And you see the foundation model companies, whether it's Claude, Anthropic, or OpenAI, dealing with this in real time. Actually, the chief product officer at OpenAI was on a podcast I was listening to last week. And the whole reason they came out with their pro plan, which is $200 a month, was they were like, look, we looked at our distribution and there were customers who were using it in 2 orders of magnitude more than kind of the average or the median of folks. And so what do you do for those? And so this is where, they learn, they update, they go, okay, now we're going to put caps on this model. And then we're going to create a higher price tier for these heavy users. And you're seeing that evolution from these companies in real time. And you're not alone in this struggle. So I think this is actually, this is a much broader conversation than what we're talking about with you, because this is actually a pretty common challenge I think a lot of companies are dealing with.
Yeah. Well, and going through the notes you sent me, so you kind of covered that. Pricing is not a number, it's this process and how it involves governance, packaging, value communication, and continuous iteration, which you were just talking about. When you say governance, what do you mean specifically on pricing?
Yeah, it's a big $20 word. So I always think of you remember that old cartoon Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill?
Oh yeah.
So for folks who maybe demographic or aged out and don't know what I'm talking about, there's an old cartoon of a bill, like literally like a bill that goes through Congress sitting on the Capitol steps. I'm just a bill. So I always think about
on Capitol Hill.
Exactly. So whenever I think about governance, I always think about that, right? And so whatever you think about our current government or what's happening with this reconciliation process, there is a process. The House of Representatives drafts a bill. They approve, they vote on it. If it's approved, it goes to the Senate. They make some edits. It goes back to the House. They make some edits, and then they send it. If they agree, they send it to the president's desk to get signed. You have this for almost everything else you do in your business, but one of the big gaps that I see is that folks haven't really established this for pricing within their organization. You talk to a CMO, a VP of marketing. Hey, when we think of a new campaign to run, this is what we do first. This is what we do second. This is what we do third. This is how we measure the outputs. This is who has veto authority. This is who else we consult in the business or on the team in order to, at what we're going to do at each stage. It's the same idea with pricing and packaging. What tends to happen, and I think this is a very natural pattern. I've observed it so many times because it's like, look, you got 3 founders sitting in a room. They write some product. They launch it. They probably spent 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon trying to figure out how they should price and package it. Things start going well. They got to hire more engineers to write more code. They got to start hiring customer support people to answer support inquiries. They got to hire salespeople to sell it. But at no point did they turn around and say, you know what, you got to hire a pricing person to manage this pricing thing, right? But what ends up happening is you turn around, all of a sudden you got a $10 million company, your product's grown, you're probably, the customers you serve have grown, the story you're telling has grown, but your pricing hasn't changed. So what happens? Everyone feels the friction. The CEO comes in on Monday exec meeting, yells at everyone because everything's broken. Everyone looks around sheepishly being like, well, yeah, but I don't own that. And nobody owns it. And nothing happens. Or what's weird about pricing too is that in a lot of situations like this, you might have some really go-getter in the organization, some ambitious person who's like, oh yeah, this is a problem. It's obviously with the pricing, I'm going to take this ball and run with it, right? And they've got rewarded their entire lives for being that go-getter. The problem is, as soon as they pick up that ball, they get shot by every executive stakeholder, because pricing is one of these things, much like positioning or product strategy, where everyone thinks that they know what the right decision is, except nobody agrees, and everyone has a stake in the outcome. The CFO is worried about burn rate and margin. The CEO is worried about the story he's trying to tell to investors for the next fundraise. The head of sales worried about hitting quota and the numbers that he committed to. The marketing person's about how it's going to affect their ability to drive leads. And so every decision is going to be hotly contested and debated, and that poor person is going to get shot. And so it's one of these things that when cooler heads prevail, like you think of our founding fathers, hey, we don't have a country yet. There's no specific issue on the table. How do we want to handle how this process works? Who's responsible for what? How does the sequence of steps? Who gets consulted? Who has authority? And actually sit down, take the afternoon with your team and write that out, such that the next time you have a situation, right? And I would say if you haven't revisited your pricing packaging in the last 2 years, you probably do. That you have at least an agreed upon framework that you can use, right? And that's not to say, again, looking at our current government, that process is always going to be pretty, but at least there's a process. There's a way to move things through.
Hey, we've got a big, beautiful bill going through right now that's underscoring what you're saying right there, the governance of whatever that is. So the third final thing I want to cover with you is this idea of stop leaving money on the table. Now, I bounced off of you that, okay, we've got this hybrid pricing, and we operationally are basing it on credits because of the tokens that we've got to pay for it in order to get people there. But we are trying to tell the value story, not the credit story, the value story of here's what you get for a fraction of the cost of the old way to do it, in minutes, not months. But then the final question is, are we charging enough for it? And I've literally put 80 companies through it in our beta test, and we have 20 beta users that actually paid to be a part of the beta because they were able to use their findings immediately to grow their business. And would ask every one of them, what is this worth to you? And I got feedback back from, it's $5,000 a month down to $200 a month and everywhere in between. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't really help. How do you know what to launch with? And I know iteration's a big thing, but how do you keep from leaving money on the table?
Yeah, so I think one area we haven't really touched on is goals. it's amazing how many times I get asked some version of, we want to optimize our pricing. Can you help us? And I say, optimize to what? And you can't optimize in a vacuum. You always have to have a goal in mind. What I would say for your situation, your early stage, I do not think that at your stage, leaving money on the table is the key consideration. This changes over time, right? There's stages that every startup goes through, often termed search for product market fit and beyond, right? The goals of a pricing and packaging early stage versus, if you're a Fortune 500 company, are going to be very, very different. At your stage, what I would be most concerned about is, does the thing we've delivered actually deliver value? Are people like, do we have a validated willingness to pay, even though, right? Because like, what do I mean by that? I think a mistake that especially some early stage companies can get into is they say, hey, we're going to launch for free. And I think that leads you down a not so great path, because it's very different to say, hey, do you want this thing? And you say yes. And I say, do you want it for $20? Value is the pleasure. The price is the pain. In order to get validated signal, we need to be able to cause some pain. Now, at your stage, if I charge you 20, and let's just say there was a Laplace's demon that I could consult that said, actually, the right price was $39.95, in a poorly optimized world, that's not really the risk that you're needing to be most concerned about right now. Because it's usually, do we have a product that actually solves the problem we told customers to solve? Do we understand who our customer is so we can get our story right and we could find them in a repeatable manner? And it's not till, I would say, significantly later that we really need to worry about, really tuning those keys to purely optimize and worrying about, okay, have we really milked, everything out of this that we're hoping for?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's our goal here too, is just to get users on it, not to give it away by any stretch of the imagination. We've got almost 2 years of development into it, so we're not giving anything away. You might get a little tool here you could try just to test it out. But I read that book by Alberto Savoia. Sean Schroeder, one of my partners, referred me over to it, called The Right It. It's a fabulous, fabulous little book to read, fun read, and it gives you ideas on a startup. One of the things he says, especially in your beta users, is they have to have skin in the game if you're going to get any sort of credible feedback. Otherwise, they just like, oh, Park, you're great. Sean's great. Matt's great. What you're doing is great. Just put it out there to the world. So, and by skin in the game, he said either they got to pay for and be a part of the beta, they've got to invest time in the beta, and they have to invest reputation. Are they willing to speak about it? Yeah. So we charged, $500 for our betas, and they came in, and then they invested their time, and they all spoke glowingly. So I know that we've got a product, at least from our beta group, that says, yes, this delivers value. When can you get it to me?
Let me touch on one more thing in your prior question as well, because I think that there's some gold there for everyone. You mentioned you had some willingness to pay conversations with folks, and you got some different numbers. First of all, massive applause to you, because that's number one thing. Having willingness to pay conversations early is something. You don't get a choice of whether or not you get to talk to your customers about pricing. You only get to make a decision of when, and way too many companies wait until they launch, and it's a sales guy on the phone with somebody for the first time, and like, how much does this thing cost? And that they're having the pricing conversation then. So I would say move that as early as possible in the process, so you definitely get kudos there. But the second thing you pointed at, which I think is would be helpful for everyone, what you experience of getting a range of answers is not unexpected. And I would even say that that's not a negative, that's a positive. When having those willingness to pay conversations, oftentimes, especially early in the development cycle, but even for later stage companies, when we get a number from someone, one of the things that we want to do, say we run a quantitative survey, right? So we've sampled 300 people and got willingness to pay data. We want to try to pull out, well, what distinguishes the folks who said 500 from the folks who said 50? Can we back into that? Because as we were talking about at the very beginning of the conversation, my willingness to pay for something is really a measure of desire or motivation. So what is it about those particular customers in that situation? I use the walking through the Sahara versus stopping for a bottle of water on the road trip. Like, are those customers in the Sahara? Like, what is going on about their context? And that may also pivot your entire company focus. So it's just like, hey, yeah, there's a bunch of people who would say I'd pay you $2, or I'm not going to worry about them. And there's a bunch of people who say they pay us $500. Like, we're going to target all of our website messaging, all of our go-to-market at finding as many of those people as possible. If those other people want to buy for that price, but we're not going to, focus our entire company around serving them, right? And companies like Avion, who are selling, at a 10,000x premium what you could get out of your tap for basically free, have found out, right? Or you could think of almost any other luxury brand has said, hey, forget the rest of that market. We're going to focus on the 1% of the 0.1% of the market who will buy a Coach bag for $30,000 or Burberry, or pick your luxury item of choice. So what I would say is what you found is not a bug, it's a feature.
Well, that's great to hear. So wrapping up here, as I mentioned, just yesterday, I ran your brand through it, sent it over to you. Did it provide value to you?
I thought it was quite insightful. I thought it pretty well captured the highlights. I think there are other things that I'm doing internally that would sort of additionally buttress the findings. I think there are things like understanding customer pain points that you probably need more qualitative, direct customer interview insights to understand. But I thought as a first pass, it was really, really strong.
Yeah, and what we found it does, Dan, is three things. Number one, it validates what you're doing well already. Number two, it highlights a gap. So if you're saying that it didn't really pick up on the pain points, the customer pain points in what I sent you, then it may well be that that's not being communicated clearly enough through your information. And everybody goes through that and goes, it didn't talk about this one thing, and say, okay, where do you talk about it? Oh, good question. But that's where you can then go into the Genie and make the tweaks there. So it builds that foundational narrative strategy for you that you can then do all of your messaging on. And then the third thing it does is, and maybe hopefully you saw something in here that it provides you some inspiration, some fresh ways to think about or talk about your brand there at Product Tranquility.
Yeah, I thought it was really strong for, I don't know what you fed in as an input, but I was...
Two things, your website and your personal profile on LinkedIn. That's all it pulled from.
All right.
So you can go back and take a look at it and go, okay, well, maybe I need to go back and tweak some things. We also, as a part of the Genie, have a brand story grader. That, and this is the thing we're thinking about as a freemium, is like, here, just put your website through this, and it's going to grade you on 14 different elements from A+ to F- of how well you are communicating, and it is based off of our 3 story frameworks that we know that work to create clear, compelling communication, and it'll give you that grade. And then you say, okay, do I need to probably go in and fix it? It'll even give you some advice on things to do in there. And then another grader in there is, now that you've got your brand story in place after tweaking it through the Genie, is grade it against your 3 top competitors. Put in their websites, and the Genie will tell you where you're nailing it, where you're sucking at it, and white space, where there's real opportunity to be able to take advantage of your messaging against your competition.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's very cool to see what is becoming possible today with all of these AI tools and people building these applications on top of these core capabilities. It's an exciting. I don't know if there's been a more exciting time in the world of technology than what we're living through right now. Scary, overwhelming, but also exciting.
Well, and you've been in the heart of product technology crafting for what, 20 years, 25 years? So you've seen it all in the last quarter of a century. And yeah, it's amazing what AI is doing out there. But I really appreciate you coming on the show. You've helped me out immensely, and I know our listeners will take away a great deal of insight from you. Where can people learn more about you? And if they want to work with you, where should we send them?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm probably easiest to hook up with on LinkedIn, Dan Balcauski. Just let me know you heard me on the podcast so I could separate it from the rest of the LinkedIn spam. try to blog semi-regularly at my website, producttranquility.com. And I also run a podcast called SaaS Scaling Secrets, where I interview scale-up B2B SaaS CEOs. So that can be found wherever your podcast host of choice be found there. So, but yeah, probably easiest just connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yep, and I'm adding your podcast to my library. Thank you so much for that, Dan. And I appreciate you being here all the way from beautiful Austin, Texas.
Thank you so much, Park. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. If you like what you heard, share it with someone you know who is going through their own pricing, overwhelming journey right now, and let's simplify it and get it dialed in. And if you are overwhelmed by thinking about having to develop your brand story, then come on over to storycyclegenie.ai and we will make you overjoyed in how quickly you can create a lucrative brand narrative strategy and all of the amazing content based on your unique, authoritative, and authentic brand story. You literally can do it in minutes, not months, at a fraction of the cost of the old traditional way of branding. The Story Cycle Genie is truly your brilliant branding content agency in a bottle that will take you to amazing places. So check it out at storycyclegenie.ai and be among the first to use this revolutionary new platform. And I hope you'll join me next Monday when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you like Dan Balcauski. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.